On this episode of Jets Uncovered, we're going to take a look at the Jets depth chart now that the NFL draft is in the books for 2018, and we'll give scouting report notes for all 6 draft picks from the Ourlads Draft Guide. It's Jets Uncovered, Draft Recap Edition on the Ourlads Football Radio Network starts now. All right, it's Saturday night, April 28th, 2018. I'm Greg DePalma. Welcome to another edition of Jets Uncovered on the Ourlads Football Radio Network at ourlads.com. And not only do we have an update on the 6 picks since, well, actually, of course, we keep in mind, in case you've missed it, we did talk about Sam Darnold. So that one's already in the books. But we're going to talk a little bit about Sam Darnold as well tonight. So 7 picks, plus the rookie free agents that have just been signed over the last couple of hours, and then the trade that the Jets made with the Colts, barring a physical for Henry Anderson. So all of that we're going to get to here, and we're going to try to get as much of it as possible in a short period of time. Let's welcome in Jan Levine. And Jan, so it started with Sam Darnold, and when it's all said and done, the Jets did a good job with, I mean, as far as they're concerned, they're pretty happy with their backfield. They didn't go, even though they did pick up a running back. I think that kid is primarily going to be used as a kick returner more than anything. So I think they're satisfied with their running back. They picked up a fullback in free agency about an hour or two ago. They pick up a tight end, so they feel good there. They're now set along the outside on the defensive line, possibly at the inside linebacker if Darren Lee does his job, and definitely now in the secondary, a corner and safety, where there's still openings though. There's still no number 1 wide receiver. There's still no top blue chip left tackle. There's still no future number 1 nose tackle. And once again, what is really angering me more than anything, and it's the one thing out of everything that has happened this offseason, which I just can't understand for the life of me, why do they continue to ignore pass rushers?
It's a great question. I wish I could understand that. Look, obviously this draft will be made and begin and end with what happens with Sam Darnold. I mean, that's kind of how we'll remember the draft, because the Jets needed a quarterback. We all think they hopefully have now acquired their franchise quarterback. You and I spoke a lot about the movement up from 6 to 3, the giving up of the multiple draft picks, and the ramifications of giving up those multiple draft picks is those guys in the 2nd and 3rd round that you could have gotten, guys who are pass rushers, offensive tackles who are big bodies, guys, 2 players who could have fit into your roster. You decided, and I think we agree with the move with them moving up, that the viewpoint is they had to move up from 6 to 3 to guarantee themselves a shot at the quarterback that they wanted. Whether or not Darnold was the number 1, we'll probably never know, but at worst he was at least 1A, if not number 1. But with the move down, that ended up happening is, okay, now you only have a 3rd round pick and a 4th round pick, and the trade last year to get the cornerback from San Francisco forced them to trade a 5th rounder, which turned out to be a waste of a draft pick, which is another guy that you could have potentially had to stock your roster, because they need multiple needs associated with it. They decided that last year getting that cornerback was the wiser move, and I think we spoke about a lot last year with given the questions due to the drug bust and some drug issues.
I'm not going to nitpick them on every single mid-round pick.
But if you gave up a 5th rounder for a guy who did nothing for your team, it was a waste of a pick.
Okay, that's it. What are you going to do? I mean, we don't even know if he's – yeah, but he's on the team. How do we know it's a waste of a pick? We don't know.
Okay.
So let's wait till next year to decide that, or if he gets cut in training camp.
Right. So you look, they took a little bit of a flyer on Nathan Shepard. I do think that Shepard might have slipped a little bit longer, but he is one of those guys that kind of you read a little bit about him, and reading a bit about him, especially in the Ourlads guide. I mean, he almost sounds as a lesser version to a certain extent of Damon Harrison, a kind of guy who likes to be in the dirt.
Yeah, but they're not going to. I will say this though: they're not going to play him like Damon Harrison, though. From what they've said, they're going to play both defensive linemen on the edge. And by the way, and this is another important point because we've talked a little bit about it. I hear other writers talking about it. Let's get this straight. With Todd Bowles, the Jets are never going to draft defensive linemen to rush the passer. Let's just get that out there. They are never going to do it. I'm not, and whether I agree with that or not, they're never going to do it. That's not what Todd Bowles wants to do. So don't ever, we're never going to talk about it. So nobody should ever talk about it as long as Todd Bowles is coach. When the Jets get a pass rusher, it will be a linebacker. They will not go after a pass rusher on the defensive line. And you know what? Every 3-4 defense can use one maybe, and they got that. They got Leonard Williams. That's it. They're not ever going to draft another guy to rush the passer. They're going to draft guys to clog the lanes, to help with with holding up so the linebackers can do all of the damage. And sure, it's great if you have defensive linemen like these kids that can penetrate and make plays behind the line of scrimmage. There's no question about that. We hope this kid can do that. But I just wanted to throw that out there because sometimes this gets misconstrued and people talk about Jets needing some pass rushing at the defensive line. No pass rushing on the defensive line. It ain't happening.
But it'd be nice if you had one.
They do. They have Leonard Williams. That's what his job is, too. That's it. Sure, we want Leonard Williams to have 6 or 8 sacks next year, and I'm sure he would like to. But that's it. Leonard Williams is our guy. And if Leonard Williams isn't getting sacks, then, yeah, that's a problem. But that's not the issue. The issue with pass rushing with our team is linebackers. That's the thing that aggravates me, is that we don't even try. I mean, Jeff Holland, rookie free agent, goes to Denver. I mean, Ostman goes to, I forget where he goes to. I mean, why aren't we signing any of these guys? Not one outside linebacker edge rusher so far, either in free agency or the draft, or even regular free agency. Nothing. It's like a scheme situation, and for Todd Bowles, it's like he doesn't care. Oh, I don't need those guys, because how do you not year after year get one guy?
Question I can't answer. I mean, even if it is.
Oh, Dylan Donahue. That's the guy. Dylan Donahue. That's the one guy they've got.
Right, and we'll have to see what he becomes, because last year he showed snippets, but I wouldn't say he showed a ton. I wouldn't go say we go into training camp with a substantial amount of confidence that he's going to be the pass rushing linebacker that you need, because I think we both agree that Darren Lee is much better. He's not necessarily a pass rushing linebacker. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, that's I guess that's Kevin Green's job. Now they did add a linebacker in free agency, Trey Williams, but he's not an outside linebacker. He's a box guy. He's more of a special teams guy. So once again, and forget about Josh Martin or Lorenzo Molden is like the only player from last year's roster to this year's roster, because he was injured, that is a new guy basically for 2018 that you can go, okay, well, I guess we hope he stays healthy and he turns the corner and becomes a pass rusher, because that's it. So that's what I'm saying. I got to believe that there's, like, if I had an interview with Todd Bowles, that's what I would ask him. I'd say, come on, I would say, please educate us. I'm not trying to bash you or anything like that. As Jet fans, we want to know why you guys don't feel you need to go out and get edge rushers. Why? Tell us what your scheme is that you believe you can win without it, because we need to know. Because I think it is a scheme thing. It can't be because they just are stupid enough that they don't think they either need it or they just keep missing. I don't know. I can't explain it.
I don't know either. I mean, we talked a lot about wanting a guy that can rush the passer. I would prefer a defensive lineman that can get you 10 sacks or so.
If you run a 4-3, yes. If you run a 4-3, we don't.
Right. Even with but again.
No, you cannot run. You can't get 10 sacks on the defensive line when you run a 3-4. It's impossible. You can't. Nobody does that.
Then, as you said, you need the outside linebacker that's going to fill that need.
Yes. Absolutely, and so it's not there.
Or you need 2 offensive linebackers, 2 outside linebackers.
Sure, that would be preferable. That would be preferable. It's sort of like the Shaquille Barrett thing we talked about. It's like, why wouldn't the Jets feel that Shaquille Barrett would be worth a 2nd-round pick at the time they had it? And again, you don't have to give the Broncos a 2nd-round pick. You negotiate. You say, we'll give you a 3rd. Like, why wouldn't they feel Shaquille Barrett was worth a trade with Denver? I mean, I don't get it. It's just so anyway. That's the only thing that has happened since free agency and the draft so far at this point, where I just can't understand how the Jets just can't just go out there. And look, it's not even a matter of missing. Like, oh, we went out and got 5 guys and they all missed. It's a matter of even trying. That's where I'm confused. But other than that, they did get those 2 guys on the defensive line, and we'll find out whether or not they can. Look, I think they did well there. I mean, at least they got a couple of guys they like. They got Xavier Cooper, who hopefully will have another good year. He was a 3rd or 4th round draft pick when he came out. Mike Pennell they like. And then of course Leonard Williams. So I think they're okay there now. And the only thing now, as long as these kids come through, is they got to go out and get themselves a future bona fide nose tackle,
which they don't have.
But they can live with Steve McClendon and Mike Pennell for a year or 2.
Right. And McClendon has been solid. He hasn't been great. He's been solid.
Yeah. So
you're hoping as you said, you're hoping the rotation, that the 2 of them rotating within that spot provides a sufficient enough production.
Yeah.
In terms of what you need to have on your roster.
Yeah. So right now, when I look at the defensive line, I say, okay, for next year, as long as these 2 kids wind up, and we're talking about Nathan Shepard, the kid that came over from the small school in Kansas, by the way, in case you didn't know where the school was, and also the kid that they picked up, Fadokasi from UConn. So both of these kids are going to compete, probably back up Xavier Cooper and Leonard Williams. That's probably what we're going to see. McClendon and Pennell will rotate at nose tackle, and the defensive line is set. I'm okay with the defensive line the way that it is, as long as these 2 kids, of course, do their job. So then you move to linebacker, and again, you pick up Minter and Hewitt and Pierre Louis in free agency. Most of those guys are just going to be special teams guys, and very rarely will play and start. Molden, as I mentioned, is going to be the big question mark among them all, and that's it. They didn't really go out there and do anything with the linebackers. So I think the big, of course, Avery Williamson for Demario Davis, of course, but the big thing at linebacker is Darren Lee needs to finally step up, and hopefully Lorenzo Molden is healthy.
Well, that's a big key. I think Molden being healthy. I think, the acquisitions they made, at least bringing in some bodies, which you would hopefully assume will help their depth in terms of creating some pressure on the outside, which has been an issue for, probably since John Abraham has been here. It's been the last time I think we probably had guys who could really, really rush the passer. I mean, you're hoping that, Pierre Louis is going to basically be a guy who provides you some sacks. I mean, that was a guy who I think they're counting on. Avery Williamson is more of a two down linebacker, but he's going to become a 3-down linebacker, or they're going to try to make him a 3-down linebacker. Donahue, we talked about before, kind of guy that we hope that maybe we get a little bit more out of him than we saw last year. We get to see a little bit more of the growth. So, I think we liked what they did in free agency this year. I think that's part of the reason why they didn't pay really any attention to it in the draft this year, because they felt that they had sufficient enough depth based upon the moves they made in the offseason that they didn't need to necessarily focus on it. And granted, partly was also because they had a limited number of picks. They had to focus on other needs. Now, whether or not they focused on the right needs, I have some views. One kind of shocking thing that I was looking at, and I was looking through, I was getting caught up on the draft tonight and looking at picks. I think when I saw that they had a shot that they could have had the wide receiver from Notre Dame kept slipping and slipping and slipping and slipping and slipping and slipping some more, and Equanimous St. Brown is sitting there in a pick, right around where you end up taking Trenton Cannon, and you don't take a flyer on a big wide receiver like that. To me, that came as a wee bit of a surprise. Especially you traded down, you got an extra pick, which basically was the guy that was sitting there, and to not take a potentially big wide receiver there who had substantial amount of upside, to me, I found that really surprising in terms of who they focused on in the draft.
Yeah, I could see that. It would have been nice to add another guy. I think that to me, I don't think, unless we would have added a receiver early, like a real difference maker, a guy that could be a guy that could be a number one. And Brown's never going to be a number one. So a guy that could be a number one, then I'm not surprised because of the depth that they have. They have a lot of these St. Brown guys. Now it would be nice to have a guy with size, like you said, because they really don't have that. So yeah, it'd be nice to have a guy like that. But I'm not surprised. Again, I think once they decided not to pick one of these receivers early, then I figured they weren't going to pick one at all. Because you just got so many receivers on the roster. There's only so many that's going to make the team. You got to right now, unless they dump Anderson, you got Enunwa, Anderson, Kearse. You got Stewart, Pryor, Hansen. That's 6 right there. I mean, that's it. So one guy gets hurt, okay, then maybe you fill it with Peak. Or Charles Johnson. That's probably why Charles Johnson is there. Maybe he makes the team if there's an injury or something. That's why I said at the open that's the one thing that's missing from the team that they're going to have to fill at some point in the next year or two, is to get a guy that is going to be their true go-to guy. And I'm not talking about Robbie Anderson coming out with nice plays down the field. I'm talking about like a true guy that you can get the big first down, that can move the chains, and could be a touchdown guy. That combination, true number one guy, whether he's a receiver or a tight end, is something the Jets don't have right now. And speaking of tight ends, that's the one thing that they did a very good job of. I mean, we have had terrible tight end play the last few years. Okay, Jenkins steps up last year and does a good job, but we had no depth. Now, Leggett, hopefully he's healthy. Yeah, you bring in Walford to see if he has a change of scenery, and that helps him. You add in the kid Bucky Hodges, who was a pretty good prospect last year in the draft and didn't work out. So now he's got his second chance. And then, of course, you add in a couple of other tight ends. Herndon from Miami. He's coming off the injury, but they say he should be ready to go no later than a month. So he's got a lot of talent to be a nice little combination, with Leggett. And then the other guy to keep an eye on is Dimitri Flowers, the H-back tight end / fullback that they picked up after the draft. This kid Flowers has got, a lot of potential. You take a look at him. He had a career 54 receptions. Matter of fact, he is actually tied for first place all time Oklahoma history among running backs for career receiving touchdowns. So that's a kind of guy. Knowing that the Jets used a guy like Lawrence Thomas, a converted defensive lineman last year, that's definitely a major upgrade.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think we like the moves for the most part they did. Again, it's kind of hard to grade a draft this early, as we all well know. But in terms of tight end, I mean, Herndon, from the bits and pieces you read about him, is somebody who's been better of a receiver than a blocker, but also seems to have the willingness to basically put his hand in the dirt and be willing to block, which is something that Leggett is probably not as good at. He's one of those guys who look at Herndon as potentially using him alongside Leggett in 2 tight end sets. It's not something the Jets have done a lot of or had the ability to do a lot of, but it's a guy who could potentially be that guy outside Leggett, and if Leggett's not ready, Herndon may get a shot in terms of being the starting tight end. So it was a good value pick in my opinion in the 4th round. I mean, a lot of the more highly rated tight ends had already gone. So in terms of who was left, he probably was one of the more highly rated guys that were left, and it gives them the opportunity, as I said, to use a 2 tight end set, which is something that we haven't seen a lot of in the past, at least a productive 2 tight end set in the past. Both of us, I personally wanted Austin Seferian-Jenkins back. I didn't think he got that much more money to go to the Jaguars. So I was a little surprised in terms of that the Jets were not able to meet that, but clearly they're high on Leggett. But adding a tight end now in the draft, adding Walford in free agency, it kind of makes you wonder as to whether or not they're a bit concerned that Leggett, the injury that kept him out last year, that maybe that could be a problem for them going into training camp this year.
No, I just think that, look, he's unproven. So you definitely, they did what they were supposed to do. You bring in, and none of the guys they brought in anyway, or none of them are proven guys. None of them. So basically it's a numbers game. So let's bring in all these guys. Walford is a guy that was supposed to have taken off by now and hasn't. All right, change of scenery. Let's see what he does. As I said, Bucky Hodges, let's see what he does. Herndon, let's see what he does. Leggett, this is more those right there, and I'm not even including Tomlinson. If Tomlinson makes the team, that's actually not a good thing. So those are 4 guys right there that if only 2 out of the 4 wind up doing a good job and staying healthy, then that's much better than what we've had, because we haven't had two tight ends to count on in a really long time. By the way, in the Ourlads guide, a couple of notes on Herndon: above average athlete, shows plus potential as a blocker because of his power and effort, and combination size, strength, and coordination will make him a tough matchup. But he's a raw prospect. So that's a guy that is not going to be the starting tight end more than likely for the Jets this year. That's going to hopefully be Leggett. But hopefully Herndon is a guy that can stick around as the number 3 tight end. And the idea is that Walford hopefully takes over as the number 2 guy. And that would be the best case scenario. But overall, the receiving situation is fine. There's nothing wrong with it. And not every team's got a Julio Jones at receiver. So I don't think that's going to hold the Jets back from winning and making the playoffs. But that is something, and I'm not saying they're making the playoffs, but that's something that is definitely a lot better than where it was a couple of years ago. As far as running back, you bring in Thomas Rawls. You know, they're a lot better this year than last year because the old man is gone, Forte. You've got Powell. You've got Crowell coming in. McGuire's second year. So the depth at running back, and as I mentioned, Flowers comes in and can also block as a fullback. The depth at the running back, fullback position is much better than it was last year.
Absolutely. I think the moves they made were some good moves. It wasn't, an area of focus. I mean, they brought in Cannon in terms of, I don't think they're viewing him really more as a substantial player in terms of the running back position. I think they view him more as a returner, which is an area of need for this team. That's been an area of need for several years. It's something they partially addressed in free agency, but it gives them another option back there, which is something that they lack. I mean, Forte and Powell last year. Crowell seems to be the nice combination back associated, a bit more of a physical back than Powell is. McGuire showed some signs last year. Obviously we all know they were going hard at the Jarrett McKinnon. It was one of those guys they had a very strong interest in, but it didn't pan out. Langford they brought in also, so it'll be interesting to kind of see what happens there. But I do think Powell will get a relative opportunity to be more of a bell cow back with Crowell used substantially as well. I don't know if you're going to see 2 back sets with 2 of them, but it's possible to start seeing some 2 back set with both of them in there. Crowell being the more physical up back, Powell being more the guy who's the all-purpose utility kind of back and receive, can run the ball. We saw what happened last year when they started giving him more opportunities. He took advantage of it, which is something that we've seen pretty much most of his career in terms of what we thought he would be in terms of whether or not he got the opportunity, and he lacked that opportunity a lot in the past. So something that we'll have to take a look at this year to kind of see, does Crowell end up being the kind of the guy who steps up a lot, or do they give Powell the opportunity to really be the guy who gets a lion's share of the opportunity back there?
Well, the fact is, what you got is you got competition. That's what you got, and that's what's great.
Yep.
Is you got Crowell, Powell, McGuire, and Rawls going at it. And Crowell's probably the leader, and he's probably the leader because he's the youngest guy, and he's built a little bit more. And again, I just wonder whether or not this particular staff really, for whatever reason, whether it's a trust issue because of Powell's injuries, little nicks and bruises, and he can't stay healthy as a bell cow type. Whether or not that has soured on them, and that's really one of the reasons they went after Crowell and one of the reasons they went after Jarrett McKinnon in free agency. So I wonder whether or not, Bilal Powell's the guy just to keep an eye on. I don't know. I mean, we like him a lot. I mean, why not? As you said, he got an opportunity last year. He came with some big runs. It was exciting to see. But hey, you know what? It's good depth to have. I'm glad that he's there right now, and it's definitely an upgrade. Now, as far as the quarterback position, again, with Sam Darnold, and we know how much better it is to have Darnold and Teddy Bridgewater on the roster instead of Petty and Hackenberg as 2 of your 3 quarterbacks. So that's a major upgrade, no question about it. By the way, keep in mind, if you didn't really pay attention to college football, Sam Darnold in his freshman season, now it was redshirt freshman season. Now he goes out there and he plays. And he gets into he doesn't start for a few games, but then he gets in there, has a really great season. His best game was the Rose Bowl game which as you know, again, if you're not a big college football fan, you know the Rose Bowl. So he threw for 453 yards and 5 touchdowns in that game. That's the reason why many people thought he was going to be the consensus number 1 pick coming into the season. So that didn't happen, but there was a reason for that. He loses 2 first-team Pac-12, all Pac-12 tackles, both his right and left tackles gone. He loses his second-team Pac-12 guard. So he loses 3 major offensive linemen. He loses his 2 starting wide receivers, including Juju Smith, who had a breakout year, rookie season for Pittsburgh last year. And so it's no big surprise that his completion percentage goes down a little and his interceptions go up a little. That is part of that. But other than that, we all know why we like him and why everybody else loves him. He's got everything else that you're looking for in a quarterback, but he just hasn't played a lot. He's played less than 25 games, started less than 25 games, I should say. And he's got to, a few things he's got to work out, whether it's his throwing motion or definitely the turnovers and make sure that you don't, leave your arm down too low to the ground where you're going to be stripped. I mean, we've seen that before with quarterbacks. So once that kind of stuff is cleaned up, hopefully at some point this year, or hey, you know what? If we don't see him this year, I got to tell you right now, I bet you that's a good thing. And I'm saying that as far as a team's sake. If we don't see him this year, that means we're probably not rushing him. Probably means we're doing pretty well, whether it's McCown or Bridgewater. And there's no reason to rush the kid. Let's just get him out there and have him as the starting quarterback in 2019.
The 2 aspects everybody talks about, right? You mentioned the first one clearly is the turnovers and holding the ball too low and subject to fumbles. The second one is slightly elongated motion, so they're going to need to work on quickening his motion a little bit. Something that should be fixable based upon the work that I think even Josh McCown will probably help him, because McCown's got a pretty quick release in terms of getting the ball out. Something also you would assume that Jeremy Bates should be able to help him with. Mentioning in terms of the loss of his tackles and his loss of his stud wide receivers, it should be interesting this year. I mean, the key for the Jets, it's one of those things they really didn't particularly address this year was the offensive line. Obviously getting Long should be a big help. We kind of hope that the guys that were injured last year, Winters will be healthy. We saw some signs out of Brandon Shell last year. Hopefully he builds on that. Like what we saw from Carpenter last year, James Carpenter. There is some depth now with the guys that they brought in, adding, Jonathan Harrison also they added. So there is some depth there. I would, granted, I would have loved to have been able to get a guy like a Will Hernandez, like the Giants got, but the lack of a second-round pick, based upon them moving up, prevented them from maybe trying to slide up even above Cleveland to try to grab, a really big, physical, mauling offensive lineman, which is an area of need. I think that going into next year is one of those things I think they're going to focus on to try to grab that guy to especially on the backside for Darnold, if he is going to be the starter, especially next year, to have a guy that gives him a little bit of a safety blanket back there to know he's going to have time and space to be able to get rid of the ball, as opposed to what happened this year in USC. And we've seen with the Jets in the past where the quarterback doesn't have sufficient time to get rid of the ball, and leads to either sacks or incompletions or worse turnovers that kind of stagnate your offense.
Yeah, hopefully, you bring back 4 out of the 5 guys from last year, even though Winters was hurt a little bit, but you bring back 4 of the 5 guys last year, so you have a little bit of cohesion there. And then most importantly, you bring Dennison in for the scheme change. And as we've said before, that's important because when you run the zone blocking scheme, you do not need the top road grading Will Hernandez types or Orlando Pace types. Is it great to have them, the Brickashaw Fergusons and Nick Mangolds? Of course. But you don't need them as much when you're running the zone blocking schemes. Really good zone blocking scheme linemen can be 4th, 5th round draft picks, athletes. So hopefully that will help the offensive line. And once they, again, hopefully that will be something that will benefit them. Maybe that's part of it, of the reason why they didn't take anybody. I mean, that was also a little bit of a surprise. Now, they did add Austin Golston. So let's keep that in mind. He's a free agent, a rookie free agent. They added him a couple of hours ago. And Golston is a 3-year starter in the SEC, and he can play all along the offensive line. Now, he did play left tackle for Auburn last year, but Ourlads believes his best position is going to be inside at center or guard. but this is a guy that's probably going to be on the practice squad, probably be like what Ben Braden was last year. So I've got hope for Ben Braden, because Ben Braden's a kid that could easily have been like a 5th-round draft pick last year. So you have Braden, you see what Golsa does with depth. We talked about Long. I don't know. Swanson to me is just like a Wesley Johnson backup. That's it. Again, maybe the scheme change helps Travis Swanson. Okay, fine. Because keep in mind, Travis Swanson and Spencer Long, it is possible if the scheme change works better and they don't feel that James Carpenter, that this is the best fit for him, they could let James Carpenter go, save a few $1 million, and move Swanson into center and play Long a guard. So they could do that if they feel like that's the best way to go based on the new scheme change. Of course, they have to have I see the right side of the line I have a lot more confidence with, because I still feel if Brian Winters can be healthy, I think he could be good. We think Brandon Shell could be good. So I think the right side of the line is fine. And they have improved a little bit at center. Now, look, I don't think that Spencer Long is going to be, any great, is nowhere near Nick Mangold type. But again, maybe the scheme change fits Spencer Long well, and he'll be more than adequate at that spot. But the Kelvin Beachum left tackle and the James Carpenter left guard situation, unless they feel Braden or Dozier can start for them in the future, at guard. The big question definitely becomes left tackle, because Kelvin Beachum, I don't, unless the scheme change, lights a fire under him somehow, that's the biggest weakness of them all. That's the one part that this team is going to have to figure out soon.
And left tackle is huge because it's the blind side for Darnold. So I think that's going to be the area that they focus on either in free agency next year or in the draft next year, depending on what he selects. And I think they should have sufficient enough cap room that if somebody is available next year that's a big-time stud left tackle, that's where I think you put a lot of your free agent dollars to remediate an area of need.
All right, and by the way, again, as far as the secondary is concerned, they bring in this kid Perry Nickerson. I'm pretty, I'm excited to see this kid. This is now he didn't play with any of the major schools, and when if you're somebody that really doesn't follow college football too much, you might go, oh wow, big deal, we picked up some cornerback from Tulane, in the 6th round. But this kid, this is a kid who ran close to 4.3. He's got like basically 4.3 speed. Now what's going to happen is he's going to start off as the backup to Buster Skrine, and chances are that's going to be his best position. Is going to be when it's time for Buster Skrine to leave. Hopefully, Perry Nickerson will take over as our top nickelback. So I like that. I like the fact that the kid's got great hands. 16 career interceptions. That's a lot. 47 pass breakups in his career. That's a lot. He started all 4 years at Tulane, all AAC this past year. So I really like that value as a pick, especially because of how fast he is. I'm sure he'll work out on special teams as well. And you add a guy like that after bringing in Trumaine Johnson and re-signing Mo Claiborne, and then of course you've got Adams and May for hopefully the next 5 or 10 years. And then maybe you see what Jeremy Clark does. Maybe you see what Derek Jones can do. Will Rashard Robinson work out? So the depth, no question. Overall, not just the depth, the starters and the depth in that secondary looks so much better than it did even just about a year ago.
Yeah, absolutely, no question. It's a much better secondary. Granted, who the Jets took this year in the draft, I'm not expecting him to basically play a substantial role, but he is a guy that you look at. We talked a lot about Buster Skrine, so he could be a screen replacement for down the road, a guy who's a nickel corner, has a ton of speed back there. The impressive part is he had 16 picks in his 4 years in college, which is something the Jets have also lacked, is a guy who's a ball hawk. So Nickerson might be the guy who's going to be the ball hawk, but you got to think he's going to get a decent amount of time. He's going to have to get a little bit bigger just because he's a bit undersized, but he is a guy that has upside based upon his speed, a guy who was a 4-year starter, so he clearly has the skill to be able to play the role consistently and being a guy who's in the lineup day in and day out. But the thing is, you have to use him smart because he is a little bit of an undersized guy. So maybe you're not putting him in red zone situations at times. So it's a situation where it's going to be more of a situational type player as opposed to maybe a guy who's a full-time player. But you look at the kind of guys that they have in general back there, and he adds a element that's kind of lacking there in terms of the speed element that's not necessarily existing there right now.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm excited about the fact that with all this extra depth, again, I hope this kid works out. I hope that Derek Jones and or Jeremy Clark work out. Because if those guys work out, then that means, you know what? If Justin Burris doesn't take a big step forward, he's gone. If Rashard Robinson doesn't work out, okay, we've got the depth now. He doesn't have to work out. Terrence Brooks, okay, he's there too. And those guys I'd love those guys to work out because they're young. But a guy like Darryl Roberts, please, I don't even want him anywhere on the team because that's the type of guy that's a stopgap. That's a guy that's just hanging around until you get the talent necessary to knock him off the team. And now I hope that with all these young guys, and again, it's a numbers game. Robinson, Brooks, Jones, Clark, you add in Nickerson. Let's throw in Doug Middleton. Hopefully Justin Burris wakes up. And now all of a sudden you've got all this young depth. Few of these guys work out. Some of these also ran vagabond guys like Darryl Roberts can go somewhere else and play and get beat somewhere else. So I really love the way that the secondary is coming along. And of course it's still vulnerable to injuries, no question. But it's looking pretty good. And that's something that we don't have to worry about right now. As far as the special teams game, the big situation is, of course, the kicking game with Santos. This is just going to be a big question mark. Again, I like Santos. I like that he was a big-time college kicker, and he was off to a good start this year until the injury. But can he stay healthy? Okay, that's the thing. Well, we hope so because we don't want a musical chair of kickers. That's the worst thing a team like the Jets can deal with is a musical chair of kickers. But hopefully Santos can be the guy, and if so, he could be around for a long time. And Lachlan Edwards had a very good second season last season, and then they've added all these veterans in free agency and all these young kids that we just talked about will play on special teams. So I think the special teams right now is going to be better than it's been in years with the Jets. But most importantly, I think the final piece of the puzzle is going to come from Cairo Santos, making sure he stays healthy and make some key kicks, and then also hopefully, a kid like this Trenton Cannon can possibly take over as the full-time kick returner and move Andre Roberts out. Because we talked about that before the draft, that Andre Roberts will be here unless the Jets find a younger kick returner, and hopefully they've got him. Because Roberts is a good one. He's a steady one, but he's about 29 years old, and he's not, some sort of major game breaker. But hopefully a kid like Cannon can win the job during training camp.
Agreed. I mean, I think we talked a lot about this beforehand when it happened. I mean, we mentioned earlier Austin Seferian-Jenkins is a situation where I believe that they could have re-signed him, especially given how narrow the differences between what they originally offered him and what he ended up signing for. It's the same thing with Chandler Catanzaro. I mean, last year that I was not particularly a big fan of bringing him on board, but you saw how well he kicked last year. You saw how clutch he was. You looked at in terms of what he provided the team and for the amount that he ended up signing for and the difference that he probably would have gotten from the Jets. I thought it was a bit odd that they didn't bring him back. So that's two situations where I think that they made decisions that I don't necessarily agree with, that especially for the variance of cost that would have cost them in order to keep the guy. I think there were mistakes. Like Cairo Santos had opportunities. He lost a job in KC. He is younger. We'll have to see what they end up doing in terms of whether or not he's learned a lot from what ended up happening to him in the early part of his career. Lachlan Edwards was good. We talked about Cannon as a guy who we think could potentially be a guy who's a kick returner, brings speed, brings an area of need back there. Maybe the kid Nickerson gets a chance also, but they definitely are, at least in terms of the return game, they look to be improved.
Yeah.
I guess in terms of the kicking game, we both like Edwards. I think the jury is most certainly still out because we don't know what's going to be with Santos back there.
Sure.
I did say the same thing last year with Catanzaro. When
Sure.
folks laughed that I wasn't sure about what's going to happen with him, and he proved me wrong. So I'm hoping the same thing happens with Santos.
Yeah.
But I have to say, I'm not overly confident in terms of going into camp with Santos as our kicker.
Well, that's good then. So hopefully you'll be 0 for 2. So that's and look, not every team has got the bona fide kicker. It's like quarterback. There's not every team. It's like seriously, it's just like quarterbacks. It's like only a third of the league has a really good kicker that you can count on that is going to both be steady, give you the kicks you're supposed to make, maybe even be able to kick the 52-yarders and then kick the game winners. That's rare. That's like, okay, that's like 1/3 of the league, and then you have maybe another third of guys that are okay, like Cannizzaro. They're okay. They're not bad. They're okay. They make some, they miss some, but they're okay. They do their job. They didn't do anything bad. And then you got the bad ones. So we got to stay away from that, 1/3 of really bad, 3 or 4 kickers, big trouble. Santos gets hurt, disappoints. But that's the thing. It's a numbers game, and it's about finding the right guy. And right now we don't have him, but I'm okay with it. Again, probably more like because I know Santos, followed him in college. Knew that he had an ability to be a big time kicker. And look, just like what happens with certain positions in the NFL or NHL defensemen, it takes a while for kickers sometimes. Sometimes kickers don't automatically hit it the first 2 or 3 years. It takes them a little bit longer. Psychologically, that definitely comes into play. It's their third team, their fourth team, and then all of a sudden, boom. I mean, look at Boswell for Pittsburgh. I mean, this guy's, hanging around for 3 or 4 years. He goes on Pittsburgh last year, and he's like, Matt Bryant or something like that. So sometimes, you just, you don't know until you find the right place. And one thing is for sure, the kid's got talent.
Yeah, there's absolutely no question about that. Like I said, I think I give the Jets right now a solid B in terms of the offseason. I would have been happier if Seferian-Jenkins was brought back. I would have been happier if Cannizzaro was brought back.
Yeah, but we really want Leggett to work out. So that's why I'm not worried about Seferian-Jenkins. I'll worry about Seferian-Jenkins if Leggett doesn't work out.
Right. Fine, I'll grant you that. But it's kind of hard to go into this season with any level of confidence associated with Leggett because we didn't see him at all last year, basically because of an injury. So, in other words, he had a redshirt season last year, and now he's coming in, and we don't know whether or not he's got any kind of opportunity to be a number one tight end or even a productive tight end in the NFL right now. You know what you had at least in Seferian-Jenkins. Granted, you didn't know what you had originally because of all the issues he had, but he showed at least a little bit of signs the year before. We don't even have anything right now really to go on to Leggett coming into this season.
Yeah, I mean, no question, but I think that's part of what we're dealing with right now with this Jet team is we are dealing with these situations. We're not the Patriots. We're rebuilding. And we're trying to find guys. We're trying to find players at every position that can be around for the long haul. And this is all part of it. And let's hope that Santos can be the guy because he has more long-term potential, and maybe Leggett does too. Because again, keep in mind, as good as Seferian-Jenkins was for us last year, he looked better because we were so bad at the position for so long. He has limitations. And he, again, his per catch average was not very good. It was pretty bad. So he wasn't a scary down the field threat in the passing game like hopefully Leggett can be. And maybe even Herndon, the combination will be a nice upgrade. So those are the things that I think are part of why. See, it's sort of like when you go shopping and you have a budget. And and I don't know if your wife. I know a lot of wives. I'm not married, but you hear the whole thing about how they'll spend, and what you're spending, too much money. Okay, yeah, but it was only $5. It was only $2. It was only 50 cents, and yeah, but that builds up, and that's exactly what happens in the salary cap. Might be $2 million here for Leggett. I mean, for Seferian-Jenkins. $2 million here for Cannizzaro. $1 million there. $2 million there. And then it's not about one player or two players. It's about 5 or 6 or 7. And all of a sudden, you've saved $6, $7, $8, $10 million. And that's all a part of your offseason strategy when you're a rebuilding franchise.
Yes, you have to maximize your cap utilization and you have to maximize your cap availability, but you also have to have players that fill neat positions that could come at a cost that is not a substantial cost above what you were going for. And, granted, you would have cost you a little more for Cannizaro, would have cost you a little bit more for Seferian-Jenkins, which would have impacted your cap position. I don't think that the impact would have been so draconian that you would have not been able to grab somebody because of that. Now, maybe I'm wrong, and maybe Seferian-Jenkins regresses this year, and we talked about it last year that we felt that Seferian-Jenkins last year, in essence, was great the first part of the year and slowed down the second part of the year. Now, part of that also could have been it was his first full year playing after a while. But in my opinion, like I said, I personally would have gone and signed both of those guys. Now, there are other needs that they have. The Jets address some of them, hopefully, in the draft this year. Granted, the main one being hopefully your future franchise quarterback, which is the biggest need that you had. And the other aspects are depth moves that you've made. So I don't think they hit necessarily any home runs other than hopefully getting Darnold. But I do happen to like getting Nickerson. I think he's got the upside. I do like getting Cannon based upon the need that he potentially fills. You've added 3 defensive linemen, so you're going to see a lot of rotation in that defensive line. We still, for the most part, probably lack that pass rushing outside linebacker, and we lack that stud left tackle that we talked about that's going to be an area of need for next year.
All right, and then the other move they made, and by the way, in case you missed it, they made a couple trades with Minnesota, and what those trades meant was their ability to pick up an extra draft pick, basically. So they pick up the extra draft pick with the trades with Minnesota, and then they go ahead and make the trade with Indianapolis. Now they pick up Henry Anderson, defensive tackle. And this is all based on him passing a physical. So the 7th round draft pick. Now this was the pick that they got from the Sheldon Richardson curse deal last year. But Henry Anderson is a very solid football player. This is another really good addition if he's healthy. That's been the big issue with Henry Anderson over his career, though, has been his inability to stay healthy. And that's why I mentioned him staying healthy as far as his physical is concerned. But if he does stay healthy, it is a very nice addition, especially for a 7th round draft pick. Now you probably go, well, why did the Colts give up a 7th round draft pick for a guy that's a really good player? Well, because they changed their scheme. So they were running a 3-4. Now they're going to be running a 4-3. So Anderson fits what's going on with the Jets, doesn't fit what's going on with the Colts. And this is what you get. You get 7th round draft picks. I mean, other than that, the Colts would have just cut him. So the Jets wind up giving him a 7th, comes to the Jets. As long as he passes his physical, the Jets are happy to give up the 7th round draft pick. And this is a really good player to have on the team. So that's also going to help out the depth on their defensive line too, especially to bring in a veteran so you don't have to worry about giving too many reps to the 2 rookies that we talked about earlier.
Absolutely. We talked about it. It's rotation, it's depth, it's the scheme that they're using. They're going to need to be able to rotate guys in and out. They don't have, other than Williams, they don't really have a stud lineman there right now anymore. Granted, that was an area of strength a couple of years ago, but, Sheldon Richardson's gone. Muhammad Wilkerson's gone. Williams is the lone guy standing in terms of what was viewed as one of the elite defensive lines potentially in the league, though it never panned out that way. So what they've done now with adding Anderson, with the guys in the draft, what they've done in free agency is at least have the ability to rotate guys and keep guys fresh there and see also which ones stand out based upon the guys that they brought on board. Maybe it's the kids that they drafted today. Maybe one of them end up standing out. Maybe it's the kid they drafted out of Fort Hays State. Maybe he ends up taking over from McClendon and Pennell. What it does give them, it gives them competition and options in camp. And then we'll get to see early on in the season kind of who stands out. And if there's guys who are veterans who are being outplayed by the younger kids, then it gives you the opportunity to create some salary cap space for the future and bring in more talented players in other positions to fill areas of need.
Yeah, we're a couple more really good because this was a very good offseason. So we're a couple of more real good off seasons away from being a Super Bowl contender. That includes Sam Darnold being the franchise quarterback. So, we're looking at between 2020 and 2021. If all goes well, the Jets could be a real good Super Bowl contender. That doesn't mean that this team couldn't make the playoffs next year, especially in the AFC. I mean, the last few years when you get teams like Miami and Buffalo making the postseason, the Jets are definitely now going to be a contender to possibly make the postseason next year, as long as all goes well with health and good quarterback play. But the definite talent upgrade and continuity on the coaching staff. They did a great job bringing in those good coaches last year and assistant coaches, which have all done well. And whether it's new offensive coordinator Bates, that's also going to be a big addition to the team that didn't have last year. So that's going to help. But it's looking good. Again, remember, there were even some in the media mid-season last year that couldn't stand Todd Bowles and wanted him fired and all this stuff. We countered that and have felt all along that, based on the rebuild, the real rebuild, which was the beginning of last year, that since then things are going well. And this is the first offseason, the second offseason really, but the first big one with the ability to spend money, to go out there and now get your franchise quarterback. And it's just a process. So I like the way everything's going. I'm excited about the future. How can you not be excited about the possibility of having your franchise quarterback here? But let's also be realistic. It's going to take a couple more years for us to get to where we really want to be. But that doesn't mean that we can't be really competitive next year and have a fun season. Now let's just hope we can stay healthy. And then next, it's off to rookie camp and OTAs, and that's when we'll talk again. We'll have an opportunity to talk again sometime in the next few weeks and find out how everything's going.
The team looks to be a much improved team from what we saw last year, although it's kind of hard to argue that they shouldn't have been improved given what we saw last year. But we like some of the moves they've made this offseason. They've improved in certain areas. There's other areas of need that still exist right now. They're going to have to get fixed over the next year or so. This is a year that you hope to see additional growth. You hope Darren Lee takes a step forward, starts building on. You're kind of hoping that the acquisition of Avery Williamson proves to be beneficial. You look to see that Dylan Donahue takes some step forward. We know we both like what we saw out of Jamal Adams and Marcus May. You look for them to be additional leaders. You're kind of hoping that Tremaine Johnson becomes the elite shutdown cornerback that the team really hasn't had since Darrelle Revis was in his prime. Morris Claiborne had a good year last year. You kind of hope that he stays healthy and he ends up taking that step forward. The defensive line is clearly a little bit in a flux right now because of the fact they're going to be rotating guys, and other than Williams, it's kind of a no-name defensive line right now. And then offensively, we talked about there's a lot of wide receivers there. Does Robbie Anderson put his off-field issues behind him and become the kind of guy we saw last year without some of the on-field antics and some of the off-field issues? Does Terrell Pryor have the kind of year he had a couple of years ago when he had that breakthrough season? We talked a lot about the tight end, what we can get out of Leggett or what we can get out of Herndon, who they drafted. What happens on the offensive line? Does the addition of them bringing in Spencer Long and him playing center, and if he can stay healthy, does that solidify the offensive line? So there's a lot of question marks on this team, but there's a lot of areas that you could see material growth. And through that, what happens is that growth ends up basically taking the team forward to kind of build upon it. Do they go from where they were this year and add several wins and maybe strengthen the core and realize they're maybe just a couple of pieces away from taking a material step forward, and that material step hopefully comes up with Sam Darnold, the quarterback, in 2019.
All right, Jan, time to take the dog out. So
Yep.
I'll talk to you again in a few weeks when we talk more Jet football. We'll get an opportunity to see how things going with the camps, and then that's it. Then they'll take a break, and it'll be then we'll just wait our time to training camp. But we'll do another one of these shows to find out how things are going on in camp, and hopefully everybody stays healthy, and we get good reports, especially from Sam Darnold and Teddy Bridgewater and all the way down the roster. So, Jan, appreciate your time, and we'll talk to you again in a few weeks.
Sounds good.
All right, that's Jan Levine, and that is going to wrap it up here on Jets Uncovered on the Ourlads Football Radio Network. Hopefully we gave you enough to chew on with all the positions, all the new players, and everything else that we can offer for you here on the show. By the way, keep in mind, free agents coming up next year. This is going to have an impact possibly. I mentioned James Carpenter. Buster Skrine's a free agent next year. And then you've got Leonard Williams has got to get paid. Jermaine Kearse. Bilal Powell probably won't be here much longer. Steve McClendon. And then the whole Robbie Anderson potential, well, I don't even know what to say about what's going to go on Robbie Anderson, to tell you the truth. So that'll do it here for Jets Uncovered on the Ourlads Football Radio Network. By the way, check back with us on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. The Ourlads guide to the 2018 NFL Draft. We're going to have our AFC recap, including we'll talk about the Jets. That's with Dan Shonka on Monday. We're going to do the NFC on Wednesday with Dan. And then I'm going to do a show on Tuesday with the founder of Pro Football Focus, Neil Hornsby. So I'll get his take on a whole bunch of different topics now that the draft is over, how the rosters have been set from last year to this year with free agency and now the draft. So that's coming up Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday right here on the Ourlads Football Radio Network. For Jan Levine, I'm Greg DePalma. Thanks for tuning in to Jets Uncovered. We'll see you next time.